I've been friends with the Tech Prepper for some time, but this is our first public conversation about everything from multi-spectral camouflage, HF radio, community building, and the future of decentralized communication. Welcome back to another T-Rex Talk. I have a guest with me today, Gaston of the Tech Prepper. We've known each other from afar. Actually, we've only known each other from afar, but we have talked on the internet for a long time and then texted over radio pretty recently. You've seen the most recent T-Rex Labs experiments on HF radio were between me and the Tech Prepper channel. So Gaston, I want to thank you for being on the show. I want to thank you for helping out so much with that's very interesting HF radio contact experiment, but also our conversations that we've had in the past have been fascinating. You're one of the most fascinating people in the radio space. I know you're doing a lot more besides that, but have you ever done podcasts where you've talked through how you got interested in radio in the first place?
Yeah, there's actually two. There's Dennis Mahato has a podcast called Hamdom Thoughts, and I've been on his podcast 2 or 3 times. In fact, we did a recording this year, and we talked about a lot of the software development efforts and over the last 3 years. So I think there are 3 different episodes over the last few years.
Okay. Ham Radio 2.0 is another YouTube channel that has been popping up in my feed quite a bit. But you are interesting. You are more of that Ham Radio 2.0 kind of guy, because we've talked about this before. Ham radio, the amateur space. It's actually kind of funny. In the firearm community, we talk about FUDs all the time, and ham radio guys tend to be Elmers, and it is the same thing.
Well, I've run into the FUDs quite a bit, so you can't get away from that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can get over that hurdle, there's a lot of value in getting licensed and getting some comms training under your belt.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And there's a fascinating set, well, I'd say multiple communities in the ham community. Fascinating people, amazing life experiences, but oftentimes you do run into people who, I don't know, it's kind of frustrating to me to find people who are simultaneously complaining that young people aren't getting involved in the hobby, but also that young people are wanting to do the hobby slightly differently. And I am going to be that kind of grumpy old man any day now, so I shouldn't probably throw stones. And I see that across all different areas. There's, our community, our little rural Tennessee community is the same way, where it's like, I wish things were like the good old days with the factories, but I also don't want anything to change. I wish there was something going on, but I don't want anyone to move here.
Right.
I wish that there were this, but I don't want that. It's like, well, those are, so... I know that you have kind of bumped into many different aspects of this.
I have. So it's funny, when I first decided to get into radio, I came into it in my late 30s. So I've only been on the air now for just over 4 years. But I got licensed 2 years before that. And I was kind of doing what I like to call round robin prepping, where I went deep into firearms, just went crazy. Every month I was coming home with a new toy, and couldn't tell my wife how much I was spending. Then I got into like the medical preps and kind of water and more survival stuff, building community. And I said, you know what, I probably should take a look at radio. And had a vague memory of ham radio back when I was in high school doing, one of the guys in our class did auto patch. And at that time, this was 1996 or 97, he came in and he had a ham radio, and he dialed up into a repeater, dialed his dad's phone number, and bridged the connection with a plain old telephone service. And I thought that was the coolest thing, but then just out of sight, out of mind for almost 20 years. So got my license, got my tech, and I started out like everybody else did. I got my Baofeng $20 entry-level gateway drug radio, the Gordon West technician book at the time, $30. So I had about a $60 total investment. Got licensed. I spent a month studying for it because I really wanted to understand it. So I spent an hour every morning. Got my license keyed up. Nobody would talk to me. Like at first, I wasn't sure if I had programmed things properly, what the protocol was. Did hear some acknowledgments from the repeater system I got into, but nothing. And I was so disappointed. I put the radio away altogether for about a year and a half, 2 years. Then COVID kicked in, and we had recently just left Arizona and did a small stint in California and came quickly back after only 3 months being there. And we had moved right at the beginning of the lockdowns. And the protocol for moving people hadn't been fully established yet. So we didn't get our furniture for 3 days. So we literally had the RV in our kind of rural property out here where we live. And I pulled out that Baofeng, downloaded an app called Repeater Book on the phone. And it found a repeater about 4 miles point to point from my location. Took out the manual, manually programmed it in, keyed up. And to my surprise, my Elmer Mike WB4ZKA came on and he welcomed me. So he broke down all of those bad experiences from the previous 2 years. And he got me into a whole path of activities. And, you know, I don't know where you want to take this, but that's how I got started in amateur radio.
Yeah. Well, and you bring a lot of technical knowledge to the table. I should have. I see that you're drinking out of your No Random Contacts mug. And I should have thought ahead and brought my No Random Contacts mug home from the office, but it's at the shop and I'm recording this at home. So I just want everyone to know Gaston sent me a mug and I'm very grateful for it, but I can't show it to you. Well, I know that you have a really interesting story and I'm curious to hear what the listeners have to say about this because and the way that you told me the story is interesting because you started out talking about multi-spectral camouflage and then you talked about some various other stuff and then you mentioned aircraft tracking. And why don't you start from the beginning, the thing that happened?
Well, so I wish we had led with this, especially with your audience. Wife and I were sitting in the backyard. We have 3 dogs and we had 2 coyotes jump in while we were there, which is pretty rare for them to come in when we're there. So, of course, I run into the house, just grab my Ruger 1022, and I said, okay. They took off. Happened again about 4 hours later, grabbed the 1022, same thing. Third time it happened, I figured, okay, I got to figure out how to suppress or quiet my 22. We're out in a rural area, so I had called the sheriff's department and said, hey, this is what's going on, and they were no help. They transferred me to Fish and Game because my question was, what are my options as a citizen? Can I discharge my firearm on my property? And they basically said, yeah, if it's your life is threatened or your wife, absolutely, but not for the dogs unless you get livestock. So we were considering getting a couple donkeys and fast tracking that project. Long story short, if I was going to do this, I would have to get the consent of, get my hunting license and get the consent of a couple of neighbors to discharge the firearm. So I went to the Granny's Got Guns. It's a local gun store down the street. And I asked for a couple of different of their CCI and Aguila subsonic ammo. I'm like, okay, let's try to minimize the crack. I don't have a suppressor yet. So I found some, I think it was 720 feet per second CCI quiet. So decided to go for a trail run into the national forest behind us, which is completely legal to shoot back there if you don't have a fire restriction. One important detail that I left out, when I bought the CCI quiet, I saw a Franklin Armory binary trigger for my 1022.
Yes. Classic, yeah.
Installed that. I should have brought the BX25s. I didn't have any idea how fun it was going to be. So it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I decided, okay, I'm going to do a trail run. So I'll break down the rifle into my pack. And I ran 2 miles out behind the house. And I started out with some normal supersonic loads. And I had never shot a binary trigger before. And it was a wild experience. So I did it and just did a quick burst. I'm like, wow, that was fun. And it took almost no time for me to dump the entire magazine, and it sounded like full auto. So at that point, something happened. Got out some camera gear because I wanted to film some of this, loaded a second magazine, dumped it again very quickly, and I heard a helicopter out in the distance. Like, that is strange. There should be nobody out here in the desert at 3:30 in the afternoon when it's over 100 degrees. And didn't think anything else of it. Loaded up another magazine, dumped it, and this thing came right at my bearing. I could see it out in the distance. So just to be safe, I decided to break down, throw it in my pack, and I started trail running. And I look up, and there's a white helicopter with a little bit of blue writing. I couldn't make it out. And it starts doing a pattern around me. And they probably thought, oh, I think they were probably called out in response to what sounded like automatic fire. With cartels or something doing training out here, which is typical. So they came out, and they circled me, and I kept on running, and I figured, you know what, they probably don't think I'm the guy, because no one in their wildest dreams would want to go out here running. So I think they're probably looking for a couple of guys with a pickup truck, just shooting at steel targets or something. So I head back to the house, jump onto ADBS Exchange, which is an air flight tracking program that is fed by people running a variety of SDR receivers that are sending back all of this telemetry information from the transponder beacons back to the mothership. And you can go back on ADBS Exchange, and you can go to a location, you can go back in time, and I took my Garmin Instinct, synced it, and I matched up all of the time. So from the moment I first did the shots, Phoenix PD helicopter was dispatched within about 3 minutes out of a local airfield. When I dumped the second magazine, they had just entered the border of the Tonto National Forest on my southeast side. And when I dumped the third magazine, they pretty much had a direct bearing to my location. I was not in their line of sight. So they were running some type of acoustic sensor. I don't know if it was initial call-in, but that got me thinking about, okay, I am fully legal as a citizen to be here and do what I'm doing, but if this was a non-friendly element coming in my direction, what would I do? Or what would I do? Like, what are my options for concealment? If they had thermals, how do I defeat that? What do I need to do for signals intelligence? So now I'm carrying my RTL SDR V2 with my Android phone that works completely offline, so I can put that kit together really quickly. For thermal, I was almost going to buy a drone with thermal capabilities, but $5,000 is kind of steep right now to test that out.
It's a lot. You got the phone with thermal capability, though, so that helps with some materials evaluation.
Yeah, and what I found is the tarp that I actually use when I go out into the backcountry in the summer has a Mylar reflective sheet, and it fully masks my signature, just being under it. So there's going to be a future series this year that's going to be my journey into signals intelligence. What tools do I need? So I bought a Uniden SD 101. I'm going to butcher the number, but basically P25 DMR scanner. And all of the first responders in my area do unencrypted, so I can listen to all of their trunked systems. I'll have the SDR, and then it's a matter of figuring out some cover and concealment techniques. So again, this is from a civilian who does not have prior military service, but it might be an interesting experiment to see what you can do to know who's coming in on your location. So yeah, that's the story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it's a wild story for me just because I've shot those CCI subs out of a 16-inch 22 barrel, and they're very quiet. And I know that a lot of the acoustic triangulation things like Shot Spotter are pretty buggy and not great and expensive enough that it's weird to think that they're out in a national forest somewhere where there's not any humans, to do the 911 call. Like it is a weird story to me on a number of different levels.
Well, let me correct one thing. I never had the chance to cycle the CCI quiet ammo.
Okay. You were still using supers. Okay.
The super, just to kind of run it. In fact, the CCI, the 920s won't cycle the bolt. You basically are semi-auto, and you kind of get a hang up and failure to extract with the 22.
Yes, yeah. which makes it quieter, which is awesome. But yeah, I should have thought about yeah. So even so, the crack of a tiny 22 bullet out of a 1022 in a national forest,
Yeah.
it still is interesting. That is a level of either very precise busybodiness from a person or a lot of sensors that I wouldn't have expected to be there.
Well, what's interesting is that the area that we live in is primarily 5-acre horse property, and everybody's like-minded here. In fact, the neighbor at the end of the street, he's taken care of about a dozen coyotes this year already, and he was the one who turned me on to Aguila loads that work pretty well. But so I can't imagine anybody called it in unless it's someone new that had just moved into the neighborhood and just wasn't used to hearing gunfire behind their property. Yeah, very, very interesting.
But you have a background in tech and software development, and you have a deeper understanding of infrastructure and problem solving than a lot of people do. So how has that affected the way that you have gotten into radio and the things that you've wanted to do?
So it's funny. When I first got into radio, I was happy just to get the analog side of the house working, just making those basic contacts into the repeater, then going point to point with simplex. And I had a buddy that I was working with who has been a ham his entire life, and he was into something called APRS, the Automatic Packet Reporting System. And you can do this as a tech with your entry-level license, and it's basically packet radio, kind of like the old dial-up days, but over radio. And I found it very complicated. Even as a technologist, you had to have a very specific piece of equipment. There were multiple different ways to interface your radio at that time on the market, different cables. The audio levels were very important. The difference between a message going through and it not coming back were based on very fine fidelity of the controls. Finally got it to work. And then as I was kind of playing with these digital modes, I said, wow, this is incredibly difficult. In fact, I did a series early on saying, why the heck are digital modes so difficult? You really do need an advanced degree. And in all honesty, I think it's because a lot of the amateur radio community came from engineering or science backgrounds, and they design stuff the way an engineer would design a user experience. And that's what I'm trying to, with my tech background, as a software architect and technical consultant, I'm trying to make things more turnkey, more appliance-like, and it's getting closer, especially in the area of things like plug and play. So I've got a little project that has evolved 3 times called MCOM tools that will finally go live at the end of this year, and it basically has an off-grid, offline first perspective. So I'm programming in 2024 as if the internet is not there, which is a very different software model than most people do. 2, simplicity. I want to get to a model where it's none of this ham radio. I need a PhD in engineering or astrophysics. I get the approved radio. I get what I call the reference gear. Plug it in and basically follow a field card or a simple SOP. And physics permitting, good ionospheric conditions, you can do what you need to do for long-range comms. So that's kind of my vision, is trying to make amateur radio more accessible and more simply to use.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I also want radio to be plug and play like an appliance. But I'm looking as you talk around the room at my podcasting setup, and it is so cobbled together with stuff that I have.
Yeah.
I can totally understand how people who are familiar with radio, people who are familiar with analog audio, familiar with RF, familiar with amplifiers, will be like, nah, there's no reason to figure this out. That cable will reach there. That fan will keep that thing cool. That thing over there works. It doesn't, well, I mean, it kind of bugs me now that I'm talking about it, but it doesn't bug me that this analog mic gets turned into a digital signal like 3 times before it goes to Riverside and then gets turned into an MP3 file on Spotify. Like, that's a lot of conversions, and it's completely and utterly unnecessary. And it doesn't bug me because I know that all the steps are fine, sort of, except for the amplifier that I'm using, which annoyed you earlier. But I'm familiar enough with this AV stuff that I'm okay cobbling it together because I know it's working. And I think that a lot of ham radio guys are at that same level of comfort, or they're familiar enough with the sphere that is the good enough or best way to do it that gives you the most options. I much prefer this cobbled together thing that I can control than, if Spotify came out with an all-in-one vlogging solution, I wouldn't buy it. I would stick with this thing that I kind of get.
So here's my perspective too, because it was nice coming into this thing as an outsider. Because I had gained a lot of experience in the software development role and how I like to do things. And I do most of my operating in the backcountry. So for me to have 5 or 6 different components with half a dozen cables makes it incredibly difficult. Right now, today on my trail run, it was 106 or 7 degrees when I went running during lunch. And I wanted the simplest setup, minimal cables, so I ran out with my Hill People gear chest rig. I had it mounted with my VX6 and the shortest cable going into a simple DigiRig Lite device straight into my Android. And all of those components are IP67 rated, so they worked with what I needed. It goes against the grain of kind of the amateur radio culture where they're like, we'll just get this giant oversized Pelican case with a 20 amp hour battery, maybe 40 amp hour battery, giant laptop. And I guess it all depends on what your goals are, I think. And
yeah. And for radio, for communication, I definitely want an all-in-one solution. I don't want anything that's nearly as kludged together as this camera setup. And one of the things that also is a little bit frustrating to me about AV, or sort of rather about radio stuff, and not just ham radio stuff, but all radio stuff right now.
The commercial stuff is no joke either.
The commercial stuff and the not even the commercial stuff in the amateur space, but just it is hard to find RF engineers that aren't working for either the government or a gigantic government associated telecommunications company or a gigantic government associated commercial radio company that sells directly to public safety sectors. So it feels like there is a massive hole in the industry. There's a massive hole where people like you and me should have better radio equipment that, it lets us do more stuff on par with Android phones and iPhones. They have amazing radios inside of those things. Yeah. The amount of capability that gives you with the amount of power that it consumes is truly awesome, but you got to be willing to play with AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile infrastructure. There's a lot of those advances in modulation and the different digital protocols. If you want to play with those things without buying a huge spectrum license from the FCC and then buying a really expensive tower from Huawei or something like that, there aren't really a whole lot of options. And that is something that is bugging me. And there's little stuff on the side, like little tinkery hobby type IoT stuff that's interesting, like Meshtastic. But there's a huge gulf between some of the protocols that exist for commercial radio and Meshtastic. There doesn't seem to be much there.
No, and I'll tell you, I did a brief tour in the commercial radio space last year, and the problem, even if you can buy this stuff as a civilian, like the old Motorola radios, or pick your commercial vendor like on eBay or the secondary market, is that they have a pretty hefty price point. They're almost impossible to program, especially coming from an amateur radio background. Obtaining the software, for example, from Motorola or some of these other vendors, are very difficult. It's become easier in the last 6 months or so. But then just learning to programming it's a freaking nightmare and a barrier to entry. And then you haven't even looked at the accessories that are required to run it. Because in a lot of cases, the batteries, the hand mics, the down leads to go with your Ear Pro will start to run you like thousands of dollars, and you still have a monoband Motorola at the end of the chain that can do just one set of frequencies. Yeah. So it's disheartening because that's the gear that has all of the engineering into it in terms of the real solid gear that's bomb proof and battle tested. I mean, these are what our first responders are using, going into fires and That's the gear that I personally want, but the closest is some of the amateur radio gear that was designed 10 years ago. Seems to be kind of the sweet spot of where that innovation kind of dropped off. So we're left with a whole lot of nothing right now is kind of where I'm at. I think we're in a transitional state of where to go with radio.
My hope is that there is a good thing to transition to, but my recommendation would be anybody who is listening to this this podcast who has any, I don't know, opportunities, connections. I think that there's a combination of factors. The free market still exists in the United States, but in the radio area, there are a lot of different impediments. But a lot of the big commercial radio companies in the United States have realized that you get massive subsidies to buy radios if you are a fire department, if you are a police department, if you are a sheriff's department. And so Motorola is able to sell $10,000 radios to little sheriff's departments like the one that we have because the federal government is going to pay $9,000 of that. And that just is pretty stifling to the free market that wants to sell similar features when... stuff. It is a little frustrating, but I think that there is a transition that is happening. I talk to more and more people all the time who would like more capability. They would like more of the commercial feature sets and tools. I've been talking to people at Garmin about some different stuff. I am really pleased to see the way that people talk about inReach. Their inReach service is like the consumer version of the big complicated Iridium commercial SATCOM stuff that you can do, but they're slowly bringing more and more of those more robust features into that inReach service because people are interested in it, because people are using it. So I do think that there is a new group of people. I don't know where they come from. If they just get kind of educated on stuff, curious about stuff on YouTube, and then they want more stuff. They want more of the commercial stuff. But I do see that is a movement that is happening, and hopefully it's enough for there to be some development in this space.
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned Garmin. I've got this thing where the tools that work best for me are the tools that are out of sight, out of mind. And the Garmin inReach is one of those things. It's always been clipped to my ruck. I've had it for a few years now. And that thing's bomb-proof. I mean, you could submerge that underwater. It's IP6 or IP7 rated. The battery life is like 30 days on standby. I was the 10,001st person to push that button for a high-altitude emergency on Mount Whitney in California in October of 2022. And the Navy came and basically took off our cousin who was a type 1 diabetic. And the Garmin inReach was that little device that had no wires attached to it. In fact, we didn't have access to his phone. And we were able to figure it out just with a simple UI. And it took about 3 hours for the actual, from the time we hit the SOS to get that back. But Garmin would be a perfect company for this type of innovation. I think they already get it. And they've got great devices like the Garmin Instinct. This trail watch is right up there too. Just simple, out of mind, just works when you need it. Long battery life, great GPS. So, hope they step up and start to innovate.
Yeah, it's interesting. So at T-Rex, we sell the Instinct watch, and we sell a couple other Garmin things. We sell I'm looking around because this is usually a very cluttered table that has some GPS stuff on it. The little GPS eTrex devices and the GPS Map 67 and the inReach version of that. We sell those things at T-Rex. And Garmin is also a great company to deal with just from a vendor perspective. We deal with a lot of companies. I've talked about this before. We deal with a lot of companies at T-Rex who are not used to dealing with civilian customers. And so I don't want to name any names, but if you look on the T-Rex website, you can probably figure out which companies are used to dealing with big box stores and which are used to dealing with big agencies. And the companies that are used to dealing with big agencies, you order stuff and they're like, sure, we'll send it to you. When will it arrive? Well, there's a lead time. Well, what's the lead time? Well, the lead time varies. And then we're going to ship it sometime. And then, they're used to dealing with the government. And Garmin is used to dealing with everybody from Walmart on down. So if you call an order or something, they're like, that's great. You will receive it in exactly 3 days. And our QuickBooks or, our invoicing system talks to your QuickBooks system and blah, blah, blah. So it's been really interesting to realize like, oh, we need to raise our game when it comes to business stuff, even though we don't do a ton of it at T-Rex. And these are some better ways that we can serve customers. But I love that Garmin has, I think that they had an opportunity when they were making the definitive navigation devices for cars, and the iPhone came out and that stopped being a product. They had an opportunity to kind of chase modern consumer electronics or to lean into other stuff. And I think they did a great job of leaning into other stuff so that marine navigation radio stuff, truck stuff, avionics stuff, I think that was a really wise move. And I think it's given them a more professional sort of understanding as a company and less consumer-esque, even though their fitness watches are pretty consumer flavored. There still is a professionalism to them that I appreciate. So yeah, I would love to see them get into amateur radio, because they make marine radios for boats. I believe they make avionics radios built into some of their avionics packages potentially. And then yeah, they do have a SATCOM product. So they also have wireless dog training collars and things like that. So they've got radio in their blood as a company. They also have, I'm not sure what's going to happen with this. They have a thing called Ant Plus, which is a little bit like Bluetooth Low Energy, and that's a open source consortium that they run. So they have the know-how for sure. But yeah. Anyway, we're speculating on what they might do, or what we would really like them to do. What are some of your projects that maybe we can be a little more specific about?
So I tend to batch my projects into like series on the YouTube channel. It just makes it easy to work on something for 4 or 5 videos in a row. Right now, I'm right in the middle of the MCOM Tools Community Edition, Release 3. And what this is going to do is introduce the plug-and-play support. I'm pulling it out of the commercial version I had developed a few years back, but really reimagining it to make it a whole lot simpler. I don't want the user to do any configuration other than picking their radio, plugging it in, and then launching just 1 or 2 apps that does some radio-specific communication. Right now, I'm really focused on JS8 call because it works incredibly well for short, mid, and long-range communication with absolutely zero infrastructure, with radios that have very little power, very modest antennas. In fact, that's what you and I used as one of the successful off-grid, long-range modes of communication. So that project, when I first started it, I wanted to do everything in radio, and I chased about 30 different rabbit holes, and I took them all to about 80% completion. So now I'm like, okay, what's the most important thing? It's, well, 1, it's got to be offline first. 2, it needs to have the plug-and-play support. And 3, needs to work with what I believe today is the most powerful MCOM tool, or MCOM mode of communication, which is the JS8 protocol. And then the next steps are to extend that a little bit to do some things it doesn't do, like better time syncing in the field offline and a few other bits. So I'll release that at the end of the year. The other thing that I'm working on right now is, speaking of innovation, DigiRig sent me an early prototype of something called the DigiRig Lite. And it's a little tiny USB captive cable. And so I'm working on a mini series. And I think we talked about this, but that device for me is now allowing me to integrate my radio with an Android phone. So I have fully switched off of my iPhone and switched over to a Ulefone Armor 1810, which has all the specs. It's got a FLIR sensor and heavy duty.
I noticed that. Yeah. I'm still using a FLIR plug-on to do some of my multi-spectral tests, but go on.
Yeah, so I got this guy, and what's interesting about it is that I had experience with the Ulefone Armor X7 about 4 years ago, and it was a $100 device. You could still get them on Amazon, and this was $700 roughly. And it's unlocked, no data plan. So I pulled the SIM card out of my Samsung Galaxy S22 without telling AT&T. And it got on the network and it says, oh, your data is not going to be supported. Call us. I said, no, I'm not going to call them. So it works right now with cell and SMS text messages, even media messages.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I don't want to call them because I'm loving this phone and I don't want to say we're going to flip the switch and kill you. And what I actually found out about this is a good thing. And I did a live stream about this maybe a month ago. So I am probably the only technologist in 2024 that has no data package on his phone. So
it's a great privacy feature among other.
Oh, it's fantastic. Well, actually, there's a few things. Wow, where do I go with this one? So I pulled out an RTL SDR V2 dongle.
Nice.
And it real tiny. And it
got
has,
one over there, yeah.
Mine almost looks like a tourniquet. And I put it in a little flashlight pouch with a small telescoping whip antenna and a little USB A to C cable. So it plugs right into my phone. And now, like out in the boonies, I can actually track all of the aircraft that are flying overhead using the ADB-SB. Mm-hmm. The fact that I don't have a data plan prevents the freaking ads from not even popping up. So it looks like I'm paying for the pro version as a happy consequence. But I think it...
No ads, no tracking. Yeah. Obviously, AT&T can still see you because you're on the network. But
Sure.
The apps and the OS can't phone home without data. So that's... Yeah.
But the cooler thing about it is that, one, I found for like mental stress, not having so much connection, especially as a social media content creator, I have to sit down now at my desk or be within a Wi-Fi hotspot to use it. So that's been great. But I'm also finding the capabilities that are offline only. So if the grid ever goes down, I'm already dog fooding what my no data plan phone can and can't do. And I'm starting to curate offline maps and a few other things. But really that phone for me right now, it's the driver for my integration with amateur radio. So next year, my shift is to switch my software development efforts away from doing stuff that requires a PC or a tablet or a laptop and more to the Android side, because that's... Sorry, I hit the... Can you hear me still?
Yep, you sound great.
Okay. The battery was going on my headset here. But yeah, I plan to switch over to the Android side of the house of software development, which is going to be a huge pivot. But the idea of having something in your pocket is going to be very interesting. Yeah. So you can EDC your comms with you now every day. You don't need to tote the big laptop or the tablet. And so a lot of opportunities there.
That's something that I am really looking forward to, and I have thrown the idea out to a couple different places. But JS8 Call on Android, what's the original developer of JS8 Call doing? His website, I haven't seen him on his website recently. Do you have any idea what he's up to? And it's based on FT8, so he's not the originator of the protocol, but JS8 Call is a great program that has a lot of stuff going for it.
Yeah. So I've been meaning to talk to Jordan Shear. That's why it's called JS8. And he designed that when he was on paternity leave several years back. And I think he dedicated 3 months to accelerate through all that development. And one of my members sent me a post to a subreddit where he said, hey guys, this is Jordan. I'm working on a clean kind of... white room, or what do you call that when you kind of look at it from a black box perspective? He's re-implementing apparently JS8 from scratch, and he's doing it in such a way where it's going to be not encumbered by any of the GPL GNU public license. And that is the bit that would prevent you from officially releasing something into the Android Play Store, for example. So I think he's working on that rewrite. I don't know if he's going to be the one doing an actual Android application, but what it will allow to do is a license that's friendly for developers to then take that code and use it and be able to go into the Play Store. So no idea on timelines, but I plan to personally get on board with that project when it's ready, and we'll see if we can put a community around that. But yeah, the other problem I have with a lot of the amateur radio software is that there's a lot of complexity, a lot of menus, and I think there's an opportunity to use that very powerful protocol under the hood, but really pare down the feature set to just passing messages. And that's how I plan to look at it. So maybe mine will fork off in a different direction, but yeah, I'm looking forward to whatever contribution he puts that is not encumbered by licensing.
Yeah, it's the what we've done with our open source stuff, which at T-Rex is super minimal. Like it's almost more of a gesture than anything. It really doesn't do much for the software community, but the MIT open source license, I think is a lot fewer strings. So yeah.
Yeah, open source is interesting. I still trying to figure out how to release my stuff because the last thing I want is trying to go into this full time and then people just fork it, rebrand it, and sell it, and then I basically have to go back to a full-time job. So it's tough. It's great to have that innovation and people to start there, but if your plan is to start a business so that you can continue to provide value, if you give everything away, there's some hybrid models that might work, but yeah, that's always interesting.
Our mentality has been we open source tools and platform stuff rather than products. So, so the design of the Ragnarok, say, is not open source, but the mounting pattern, the whole pattern for the Ragnaroks is open source. The all of the stuff that we've learned about making sidecars, not so much, but the mounting system, the sidecar spine system, and the tools to make that's all open source. So hopefully that's a way that we can encourage innovation, but still have some stuff that is our own. I don't think everything has to be open. I did see a fun clip of Elon Musk saying patents are for the weak, which I enjoyed.
He's a masochist.
It's like, yeah, if you have enough engineers where you can move faster than anybody else, yeah, you don't need patents. I think our patent system is completely broken, but also you can just ignore that and just go faster than everybody else.
Yeah, but he also requires commitment of people working for him for the next 3 years, 18 hours a day. So yeah, of course they're going, and for very little pay compared to the rest of the industry. You should, if your product is so cool that you can demand young engineers work back-to-back shifts simply because they want to make rockets, you're playing a slightly different game than most people. Yeah, no, I respect the guy, but yeah, I could never personally work for someone like that. And again, I have in my 20s, I did.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, I will never have the opportunity. I don't have the capabilities. I'm not really able to do stuff like that. So the temptation will never come up. I think it's fascinating, though, to see that one thing about Elon Musk, which doesn't actually change the subject, is that I feel like he is a little bit of a simultaneous pathfinder and new pathfinder and old pathfinder at the same time. Like he is doing new innovative stuff, but also doing it the way that it used to be done. Like he's skipping a lot of the presuppositions of the 21st century. Like we're going to do cars, but we're not going to do cars the way that the big three have done cars. We're going to do cars the way that cars were done before. We're going to figure out manufacturing first. We're going to do rockets the way that NASA used to do rockets before all the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, something that a lot of people are going to need to get back to. Because a lot of the ways that we do software, the ways that we do business are not sustainable. They require the momentum of the past. They require the subsidies of, the protectionism of the government, and it's just not sustainable. So people who are willing to really learn from the past and try new things, even for markets that don't exist yet, like ham radio 2.0, we know that the desire to do the things that ham radio 2.0 could do does exist, even if that market isn't fully developed yet. And so there needs to be more of that. People need to be willing to take those kinds of risks, but also to rely on some of those proven ways of doing things. This is still an idea that I'm formulating in my mind. I think that we as a society have pursued expertise over excellence. And so then it just becomes like, well, who certifies the experts as opposed to who can actually demonstrate the excellence of the design, the product, whatever it is. And it's just a very stagnating sort of trend. But anyway, let's get back to other projects. So you're moving towards Android for future radio stuff so that things can be more portable, more robust, more energy efficient, more accessible.
Yeah. So, like I said, this DigiRig Lite is a basically USB audio interface. And the genius behind it is that all of the digital modes work with just audio in and audio out. And then you need a mechanism to trigger the push to talk button to have it be transmitted over the air. So he built a little voice, a Vox circuit. So when the audio is high enough coming out of your phone, it'll trigger the PTT and transmit that audio. And the device is it's tiny. I mean, I actually have it right here. So this is a little pouch that I designed. And the genius was something like this. It'd be nice if it was all built in. But that is the entire circuit. And then it has the USB-C, so modern interface going into your phone. And then he has a 3.5 millimeter female socket. And you plug your existing cables if you were an early adopter of his stuff that works with your radio. And this is my cable for my VX6. Is a small 6-inch run with a threaded connector. It's got the gasket. So
yeah.
And between that and my phone and my VX6, I am really happy with it. And the fact that it's an audio interface and not like a packet TNC, which was traditional ham radio, this opens me up to doing any type of digital mode. So JS8, when that becomes available, will be a thing that we can do with that device. So yeah, Android as a platform is very intriguing. And then the other thing I had looked at into a few years back is ATAC, which I know you've done some videos on. So I'm considering for next year ATAC as a platform and not writing my own application, but writing plugins for ATAC. And I haven't really fully considered that yet, and have that kind of be the combo bridge. Because the other thing I really enjoy from the software package I've worked on called MCOM Tools, one of the big features I built into it was offline map support. So I have pre-cached USGS topos for the entire United States, and I've cached them down to forget which level of zoom for my local area, so I could actually use it for land nav. But again, it's cumbersome to carry even a 7-inch tablet like the Panasonic ToughPad. But again, the phone with ATAC, you don't have to reinvent that wheel. I don't have to be a GIS specialist anymore. I can focus on maybe the commo side as a plugin, and again, just using those off-the-shelf DigiRig cables and components. Now I have a very robust platform. So I'm looking for opportunities where I don't have to reinvent the wheel, and just kind of layer on what's the most valuable thing you can spend your time and energy on that people want. And I think it's going to be the plugin market.
Yeah. Yeah, I have kind of come around on ATAC. When I first messed with it, I did not like how clunky it was. But over time, I've really come to, it's still clunky, but I have come to appreciate some of the reasons why it's clunky. The fact that nothing in it is optimized for a specific version of Android or a specific version of WebKit or whatever. Everything inside of ATAC just kind of runs on its own. There's not a lot of dependencies in there. And so it'll work on a new phone. It'll work on an old phone. It'll work on a weird Chinese phone with built-in thermal camera. Like, it'll work with some strange stuff because it doesn't require a whole bunch of Google Play services framework things. And as a result, yeah, it eats battery and it's kind of clunky. They haven't updated stuff in a while, but it's got all the non-proprietary stuff. It just likes most file types. It opens zip files. Mobile phones don't like zip files because they're too old-fashioned. ATAC likes zip files. ATAC thinks zip files is a great way to organize data packages. So yeah, it's if you build your communications plugins around XML and other really simple old-fashioned file types, it just kind of will work. I think it'll be pretty easy to develop for.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not adverse to using older tech. I mean, the radios, for example, that I use, people get really upset because they see me running around the field with these man-pack radios, in the dead of summer, and they're like, "Do you have a recommendation for another radio?" I said, "No. I mean, these radios are from they were my favorite radio is the Yaesu FT818ND, and its predecessor came out in 2001, and it was recently discontinued at the end of last year. And that thing is a 2-pound radio that is high quality. Almost everybody that I know that had purchased theirs going back 20 plus years still has it. So it's not like the G90 debacle that we had during the our video, where the pieces start falling off of it. But there's something up to be said about older engineering techniques and software and older hardware. I just feel like there was a very different discipline that we kind of crested at probably around 2010. And I honestly think a lot of it has to do with this shift to more layers of abstraction, probably in multiple industries. And you have a new generation of people going through academia that don't understand the fundamentals of how things work at a low level. And they start with 2 or 3 levels above where you would normally start 10 years prior. And it just leads to a lot of fragile development practices that tend to come onto the market. So a good example is like the Chinese SDR radios. I mean, you really have to wait 2 years for the firmware to stabilize on those things before you have something that's not going to, reboot on you when you're out in the field.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been talking to people about this, and not just for development, but even just for understanding how software works. A friend of mine got involved in video editing and animation in the very early days when it was on computers, about almost exactly the same time that I did. And computers were pretty basic back then. And he now works with a whole bunch of younger guys fresh out of design college, and they don't understand what is happening under the hood because they've grown up with apps and touchscreens. And I like the cleanness and the flashiness of some of those things, but just not even understanding how file management should work, because there's these other things that do it for you, because, this app does this thing and all of its internal components are hidden inside of that app. Really limits you when you need to kind of work around this, and you need to if you're getting into video production, graphic design and things like that, yes, you can do everything inside of your touchscreen, Final Cut Pro, whatever, but ideally you actually know what's going on so you can use multiple tools. And all of the great pioneers and people who develop new techniques and are really pushing the envelope are combining. We generate open VDBs in this package, and then we convert them so that we can get them into Unity or Unreal and do something that no one else has ever done before. And then we take that and we convert it into this, and we, the number of people who actually are really, really capable of doing that, it's kind of shocking how old they are. And it's interesting to me. So with my own kids, I'm trying to figure out, how do I get them into computing? And at the moment, we're starting off with some pretty clunky old games and emulators and some pretty old-fashioned stuff, just so that I can give them some shelves in their brain for the fundamentals.
Interesting. Yeah. Are you throwing at them the Logo programming language? Are you familiar with that from like the Apple II days?
Not yet. I really should do that. I've had them mess around inside of Scratch, and Scratch might even be a little bit, it's sort of node-based, and hopefully it's not too abstract, but it is a way of, you can do if, then, and there's, consequences and connections and stuff. So that's as far as they've gotten. Oldest is 8. So we should probably start doing some more command line stuff for sure. But I also need to get back into that. It has been a very long time for me. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, very good. There's a device called the Kraken SDR. And I've heard people talk about the ease with an experienced operator of mounting this thing in a vehicle and basically doing a fox hunt that will give you turn-by-turn directions. And everybody says, there's this one myth I hate about radio. Whenever I post something that if you transmit, you're going to have your location found and you're going to have fire upon you. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case because there's a lot of techniques you can employ. So especially where I'm at, where it's rural, I'm actually going to purchase a Kraken SDR and I'm going to have people try to find me, not in an urban area. I want to see how practical it is for them to track me in the backcountry with gear like that and whether they can even do anything with their vehicle if I'm not on a 4x4 trail to find where I'm beaconing from.
That is a fantastic experiment because all the demos I've seen of the Kraken they're finding transmissions that are pretty constant. And I mean, it's impressive enough to do that. So the developers are down in New Zealand. It's actually kind of funny. I lived in New Zealand. And so some of the demos driving around, I'm like, hey, I've been on that road. I know where that radio tower is. This is not a fake demo. They're actually going to that radio tower. So it's no mean feat to figure that out from a constant transmission, but figuring that out from sporadic transmissions takes some doing. Now, I also know that there are military devices that are a bit more sophisticated than the Kraken. There are some really cool things that you can do once you have multiple sophisticated devices in the air. So it kind of depends on your threat model. But yeah, I am super excited to see you mess with the Kraken. And my brother David has been telling me to buy one and mess with it. And the only reason that I haven't is just the time. I know that it's going to take some time, and I have enough stuff on my to-do list at this moment that I've been responsible by not buying it is actually what's going on.
Well, I'll tell you, if I do buy it, I'll send it to you after I'm done with it. You can play with it and do a whole video series on it or whatever you want to do.
Maybe I should buy it. That way I can check it off my to-do list and then send it to you, and then you have to figure it out. That's probably the better way to do it.
That works too.
Yeah. The fun thing about that is that not only is it multiple SDRs that are time synced so that you can use them for direction finding, but it looks like there is some pretty good plugin development for those turn-by-turn directions. I've seen some stuff inside of ATAC, and I've seen some stuff as an overlay. So yeah, the one cool thing about the current state of software development where everything has dependencies and everything lives on top of another thing is that sometimes that does give you a head start on testing and evaluating and experimenting with stuff. So yeah.
So yeah, that's all the projects that I have on the kind of the board for right now is some SIGINT stuff and software development that I need to put a bow on and move on to Android.
Yeah, very cool. Now, so as you're moving on to Android, simultaneously, I am really not liking Google very much. Google seems to be getting worse. So Android kind of sort of lives on top of Linux and the Linux kernel. So how hard is it for you to take some of the work that you've already done, compile it for Android, take some of the stuff that you're going to do for Android, compile it for, future devices? I'm not a software developer, so how transferable are some of these things that you're going to be building?
So the last time I touched Android was I had a small mobile business in 2010. So I'm about 14 years out of date, and that ecosystem and the platforms and the languages they use have kind of evolved. But at its core, they still support Java development, and that's actually what I use professionally. And mcomtools, which runs on Linux, was built for that. So I think I can port a large portion of it. So I'll be one of those developers that's just going to use an older language, even though Google's moving away from it, just to get up to speed faster and be able to reuse some of the existing code, not have to rewrite everything from scratch. It's funny. There are a couple of languages that I was looking at, and it's, do I really want to spend the time and the investment and weigh the pros and cons of how much time it's going to take me to be competent? When can I produce value? And I feel like I'm running out of time to get some of this gear out there before stuff goes sideways. So I'm going to stick with what I know. It'll probably be Java. And it's unfortunate because getting back to kind of the iPhones and the de-Googled phones, there are very few devices that are actually able to run kind of the de-Googled operating systems. And
Right.
my
Yeah.
Uli phone has all of the hardware specifications that I want, and sadly, this thing is just not on the list of supported hardware. So I think you're stuck to like a Google Pixel in a very short list. There was a project that I wanted to look at, which was Linux-based, called Ubuntu Touch or Ubuntu Phone.
Apparently it's getting better, but it's been getting better so slowly that
Okay.
yeah. Yeah. I go back and forth where Android is so common and it is so widely available. And then I go back to I really would like some more dedicated devices so that not everything is Android running a browser with JavaScript on top.
Yeah.
Like it seems like every time a new device is rolled out, it's like, oh, is that really the thing that you just described? Or is it really an Android phone running a browser with JavaScript on top in the form of the thing that you described? It's like, oh, well, it's actually,
Well, so that's the architecture for my MCOM Tools platform.
Right. Yeah.
It-
As
it
long as
basi-
you're open about it and you
Yeah.
don't pretend like it's something magical that you built from scratch. Yeah.
But that's not a bad design pattern because the nice thing it gives you is that if you have something like it running on a computer, you can connect to it with your phone with a web browser, and you basically get the
Yes,
same
yeah.
functionality. So that was the other reason, was to decouple all of the logic on the back end from the user experience side of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have MCOM Tools was on Raspberry Pi first
Yeah.
and now proper Linux and then in the future Android. So yeah, it's a lot of different things have been developed and it just keeps getting better all the time.
Well, the challenge is that I've been accused of being a LARPer, and I'm not. I'll be the first to say that I am not prior service, don't have any type of experience with any kind of law enforcement agency. But I go out and I try to do practical, real-world applications in a austere environment. And part of that led me to the Manpack design, simplifying some of these interfaces with the computer. But the Raspberry Pi was where I started because that's what everybody was doing in amateur radio. And I quickly found
Yeah.
that for emergency communication, you can never rely on that thing. I went through 5 of them in one summer. And that's when I abandoned it and I called it, I came up with this January mantra, I think it was like 2021 or 2022, called Tools, Not Toys. And
Yeah.
the Pi was great for the people that run their stuff in a shack in a environmentally cool environment. But out here, the SD cards go, there's a lot of hardware failures. And that's when I discovered the Panasonics and those little FZM1 tablets with the extended battery. I get 18 hours. Those things are IP55 rated. And they work with my gloved hands. And I can sweat all over them and just... So that's how I find the gear. And it's not that I'm abandoning a project. It's I get information as I use it in the real world.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
I'll drop something that just doesn't work. There's just no point in me continuing the Pi when I know I'm not personally going to be the user. So I just kind of killed that project altogether. And then when I discovered the Panasonics, I found, wow, now I can do a lot more with screen real estate. And that's when the maps came in. And that's when the
Yes.
offline mapping capability came in. So yeah, a lot of my projects are very evolutionary, and I know sometimes I'll have a lot of momentum where I get excited about something, and then 3 months later it turns out it doesn't work. So I encourage people that watch my stuff, if you see something on the channel, don't buy it right away. If you see it 6 months, a year, 2 years ago, like those core radios, chances are good that they're fully blessed and work in an austere environment. Everything else is something I have to look at. And the moment it gets in the way of the thing I want to do, the operating and the task at hand, that's the point at which I just absolutely drop it. The Motorola's fell into that. The Pis fell into that category. So yeah, unfortunately, my projects have been a little bit slow, and it's just because I'm learning as I'm going and refining as I'm
Yeah.
going. And
You
wish
discover
I-
stuff that you couldn't have anticipated a lot of times. The real world does that.
Well, it does, and there's nobody else because on the amateur radio side, most of these guys are the average age 65 to 75 years old. They operate in their shack with very big gear, large amps. So there was no, the closest community I found to this was something called the SOTA guys, the Summits on the Air guys. And that's how I got started, where you carry your gear to the top of a mountain, man portable. And it teaches you about how to size your batteries, how to have that compromise of size, weight, performance, but still being able to do the physical activity to get there, plus have the support gear to keep you safe, whether you're operating in the winter, summer, or somewhere in between.
Yeah. So there's still a lot of lessons left to learn. There's a lot of tools that need to be developed. So I want to recommend to everybody listening to this podcast to follow you on YouTube, because you have a tremendous ability to test stuff and not just find stuff out, but document and demonstrate the reasons that you are moving from one platform to another, one radio to another. But the other thing that I'd love to do is recommend that people contact you to figure out how they can help, because you mentioned feeling a bit of a time crunch. I'm sure there's other folks out there who would love to contribute something. And I contributed a logo to you. That is the extent. That was all that I can do, is to tell you, like, yeah, you need a logo for a thing. I have a copy of Photoshop. But I also have this podcast. So anyone who's listening to this podcast who wants to talk to somebody who is pushing the boundaries or pushing the sport or the hobby of ham radio, amateur radio, away from what it has become and back to like 100 years ago, amateur radio guys were inventing stuff that became commercial products. Yeah. It was not just a clunkier way to do chat rooms. And anybody who wants to take the science of radio communication back to something that is less dependent on government agencies, less dependent on giant multinational corporations, less dependent on various internet service providers, and turn into something that is basic and functional and practical. I think that you are right at the forefront of that. So anybody that wants to help, I really think should be contacting you to see if they can pitch in on some projects one way or another. I wish I were the guy to do more. But one thing that I can do, that I hope to continue to do, is talk about radio as a tool, not as a toy, and just try to develop a little bit more interest, a little bit more desire for people to use it that way, just to have more capacity and functionality to communications equipment. So I'm going to do that by buying more Chinese radios and having them fail on me. That'll be my contribution.
No, and you did a video not too long ago where you kind of walk through, I think, the radio spectrum and kind of the relative merits of the FRS, GMRS, ham radio, and a few other things. For anybody who's interested, I think now that I have close to 300 videos over the last 4 years, my personal favorite playlist that I put together is the No Random Contacts series. Yeah. And that was really my goal in radio, was to talk to a known quantity or person in my network. And I did that where I came up with these concentric circles of communication. So what's the tool that requires no licensing and is frictionless for your community? And then what's required if your needs extend to the city, the county, the state, the region, and then nationwide. And I think I have about a dozen videos, and our collaboration was the last one we did, where it was that long range, no infrastructure from Tennessee to Arizona. So that, I think, gives kind of the best kind of flair for what I do, and what the channel is about is really just communication as a tool based on your particular needs anywhere between your community and nationwide.
Yeah. So another thing that's on my to-do list, speaking of different types of licenses, is I really want to put a GMRS repeater up somewhere in Hickman County, just for other people to use, because we have a business band for T-Rex usage, but a GMRS repeater that other people could use, I think a handful of people would get on that and do stuff with it. So we have. Yeah.
So community is a great part of this. I like what you're doing to actually not only, deliver this information to pull people in from wherever they may be located, but your community. And I did something recently last weekend where I was trying to send over my Android phone my little HT email. And they have an application called WODE, WinLink on Android. And my problem was there was no local radios in my area. I was out of range by about 60 miles. And I went through a little bit of research and I built a WinLink RMS gateway, a packet gateway at my house. So it's attached to Starlink at the house. It has battery backup. It has a dedicated VHF antenna. And it runs the software now 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So now anybody who's in the Tonto National Forest area out here in Cave Creek, New River, Arizona, they have a service. So I wish I had mentioned the idea of us contributing comms or capabilities to our local neighborhoods. That's the other service that getting into these things provide. So kudos to you for putting up some GMRS shared infrastructure.
Well, I said it was on my to-do list. I didn't say didn't say we've gotten very far on that. But yeah, there's all kinds of projects, and ultimately this is the goal. The goal is not so much to master the discipline just for fun. We do want to create this capacity and this capability for the purpose of actual communication with actual people. So building community is a huge aspect of that. As fun as it is to talk to people as far away as you are, the next thing I need to mess around with is NVIS antennas and, countywide communication. Because honestly, in an emergency, that's who I'm not going to be much help to you.
No.
1,700 miles, whatever it is, as the crow flies. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the sweet spot. And that's what I recommend to everybody. That NVIS communication, that's a whole side video, but we use it daily with everybody out here in the Southwest on very low power for voice and for digital. But getting back to the repeater front, I have a 400 megahertz repeater that is going to be donated to me, and I have nothing planned for it. So if you want me to send it to you, it's fully unlocked.
I will trade you a SDR Kraken for it. That's what we'll do.
You have a deal, sir.
Sounds like a good plan. Well, thank you so much, Gaston, for coming on the show. For coming on the show and just for chatting. I have appreciated our talks, the work that you've done, the experimentation. You are doing, I think, really important work. But I also appreciate the way that you're doing the work. So I would love to just figure out more ways that we can help you with your project, more ways that the T-Rex community can help you out. So yeah, keep us posted on the stuff that you're doing. You do a great job at documenting things. And so I'll put some links in the show notes, but everybody knows how to Google stuff on YouTube. I think YouTube is the only place where Google search still works, actually.
Oh, really? Yeah. Don't get me started on
seems
YouTube.
Sketchy.
I've been properly demonetized for almost 2 years now, so they're not a fan, or I'm not a fan.
There's going to be a bunch of alternative stuff that needs to be built. So we'll focus on radios, some various other things. We'll get to other types of content distribution in the future. So yeah. Well, have a good night, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you all for listening to the show. Make sure that you think through your community, your communications plans. It is worth, it's getting a little philosophical, but it is worth thinking through the ways that we do stuff. Is it going to be built on a bunch of dependencies? Is it going to be built on a bunch of kind of modern bureaucratic presuppositions, or are we willing to go back to basics? Even though it is more expensive and difficult sometimes to control your own infrastructure and learn stuff somewhat from scratch.